Our reading this morning is the Edwin Markham poem, whose life spanned the 19th and 20th centuries. It was a long time ago. He wrote, "He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in." Back in the 1960s, a small, indefatigable African-American woman named Gladys Rollins was inspired by this poem. She created a storytelling presentation, actually it was in 1957. She used a flannel board to make these ideas come alive for children. Rollins was a social worker and a member of the Race Relations Committee of the Philadelphia yearly meeting of the Society of Friends, the Quakers. Gladys Rollins' flannel board began with a small green felt circle with a felt figure U in the middle. As the story unfolded, the circle grew and captured the Markham concept of expanding the circle of caring to take someone in. So, thanks, Kathy. She would say, here you are in your circle, your whole world when you were first born. As you grew older, your circle grew. And here the storyteller took down that first small circle and put up a larger circle with figures to represent your family. Perhaps your mother and father, your grandparents, your sisters and brothers. Next, that second larger circle came down and was replaced by a larger circle and figures representing friends. Then another larger circle representing community, along with felt figures that stood for people important to you in your small world. Gladys Rollins and her committee spent the 1960s telling the story in the Philadelphia area. In the late 1960s, one of her storytellers moved to Delaware. After much searching, she finally found a group of women willing to join her to take the program into Delaware schools. Women at the First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, my church. So, the first Delaware storytellers were a group of women I actually already had heard about and grew to know and love. Along the way, this group was able to secure co-sponsorship from both AAUW, the American branch of the Delaware branch of the American Association of University Women, and NCCJ, the Delaware Region National Conference of Christians and Jews. When the original AAUW Green Circle coordinator decided to rotate off, a friend of mine suggested I take her place. Thus, I can find in my 1973 summer calendar an ongoing set of meetings in the First Unitarian Women's homes where I got to know them and to understand the program. By that fall, I was meeting with several school staffs to promote Green Circle and scheduling the storytellers in classrooms. I was also on the job to recruit more helpers to take this program into more schools. By the end of the school year, I knew I also wanted to be a classroom demonstrator with Green Circle. So I learned the script. I practiced manipulating the felt figures. And once we had completed the circle of caring to extend to the community, we took those figures down and we again focused on that you figure. The story encouraged children to think about a time when they were included in someone's circle of caring, how they felt. Then we took the you figure out of the circle and talked about the times they might have been excluded from someone's circle of caring. The feelings in the room were always palpable. I got shivers on my back. One way or another, they all had experienced that exclusion. Our next step was to put up a larger circle and place felt shapes around inside that larger circle. And as Kathy's working on this, I'll keep going. These figures she's going to be putting up will be representing fat, thin, short, tall, different skin colors, different religions, rich, poor, gender, disabilities. That is, the differences that kids have frequently used as reasons to tease or exclude or to even bully their classmates. We always concluded with the Edmund Markham poem. Ending, we drew a circle that took him in, the reading I began with today. And then we told the Chirkandoo story that we just did, an allegorical tale the children loved about the impossibly ugly barnyard animal that the other animals left out, but who ended up saving everyone from a hungry fox and helping them to see him as a valued friend. At the end of every session, we gave each child a white button with a green circle on it, something the children would later tell us they treasured, saving it often in a special drawer at home. The next fall, we're now 1974, I was in the classroom myself with my own flannel board, and I was observing other new demonstrators. And that July, the 3-judge federal court panel had declared the city of Wilmington to be racially segregated, and there began the low murmurs of talk of the possibility of the move to desegregation. Helping children to appreciate differences was taking on new meaning. One of our newest volunteers that fall of 1974 was my dear friend and first Unitarian member, Laralee Suter, a psychiatric social worker by profession. My visit to her classroom presentation changed the course of Green Circle. Laralee was not telling a story. She was doing her normal thing, engaging the children in a dialogue. The children in her classroom were talking about real times they felt included and how they treated others, and real times they were excluded and how they felt and how they treated others. It was so powerful. By then, we had gathered maybe 15 to 20 volunteers like me who saw such potential embedded in this story, and now we had a vision for how it could be even more effective. Soon after that, Kathy Stamm became a volunteer facilitator. I'll never forget her walking down my driveway to come to our meeting. Laralee helped coach us to create a script that could be used as a basis for the conversation we thought now was so much more effective. The flannel board was the backbone, and our questions opened up the real-life experience of the children. Within several months, and by the spring of 1975, we had a script we were using. We were no longer demonstrating Green Circle. We were now facilitators, facilitating conversations and helping children look at their actions. When we laid out that big flannel board and started out with the shapes representing differences, we were now asking for real-life examples. Have any of you ever been teased about being short or tall? How did that make you feel? How did you react? We had the children talking about real things happening to them as we went through the series of differences. One of my favorite things to do was when we got to skin color was for the children to gather, putting their arms all together, noting none of us were black or white. And together we had such an array, a wonderful array of skin tones, none exactly the same. Soon, we facilitators were signing up for 2 visits to the classrooms. First, to introduce feelings of being included and left out, and then we'd come back for a return visit to explore the differences we use to keep someone outside our circle of caring and what we might want to do about that. We were giving children a common language to articulate their feelings, that their classmates could empathize with and understand. Now, I had been an elementary classroom teacher and totally understood the importance of the classroom where children feel accepted and respected by their peers. I understood the critical connection with learning and classroom climate. There was potential here to make a real difference in Delaware classrooms. Soon we could see the value of follow-up activities to reinforce Green Circle concepts. And I developed a book with a series of lessons our volunteers could take back into the classroom for 2 more sessions and other activities teachers could use. Eventually, our volunteers visited each classroom 4 times, twice to introduce the ideas of inclusion and differences, and the 2 follow-ups that depended on the unique classroom's needs. Ultimately, a problem-solving process was adapted to equip children with a concrete procedure to solve the real problems they identified and getting along with each other. But in the meantime, lots more was happening. Larry launched us to being facilitators, but we needed to learn facilitation skills. So we started out memorizing a script, and then we learned how to listen and how to question. Facilitator meetings were all learning experiences for each of us. We used the curriculum for parent effectiveness training, and some of you might remember that, PET. Studied the stages of moral development. Along the way, I became a better parent, no doubt a better wife, and for sure a better listener. Our facilitator meetings were lively and fun, right? All in the quest to create a non-judgmental classroom where children could respect each other and be ready to learn. I was loving using the script with children and making presentations all over Newcastle County to school staffs to promote the program, as well as to community groups to recruit volunteers. Frankly, it was even more fun using the new script with adults and having them reflect on their experiences. As Delaware inched toward the original court-ordered date of September 1976 for implementation, there was increasing interest in Green Circle as a means to help children deal with differences. At that point, NCCJ had a decision to make: to close the office that had been losing money, or keep it open as a means to play a role in the challenges that lay ahead for our community. There I was, running their only program, and now I was asked to help them as a very new, very part-time executive director while NCCJ hit a restart. To make a long story short, much shorter, thousands of children each year and scores of volunteers later, Green Circle was in hundreds of Newcastle County classrooms. Upon implementation of the court order in 1978, we secured a federal grant to support all this work. And First Unitarian in Pike Creek's Kathy Stam, one of our volunteers extraordinary, took on the reins as Green Circle coordinator, thus allowing me to focus on other NCCJ programming that would also be supporting the peaceful implementation of the court order. Over the next years, many others joined Kathy's team. Separately, we designed several high school programs focused on the same ideas. Your Jean Hansen here at Mill Creek was a part of that endeavor, and she worked with us with high school. In 1982, when our federal funding ended, we secured state funding, and our services went statewide. Soon, Kathy and her team, then totaling 5 paid positions and augmented by a cadre of volunteers, were working with more than 10,000 students each year throughout Delaware in 17 of the 19 districts, far beyond our first reach of Newcastle County, and we kept finding better and more effective means to reach children with our Green Circle concepts. They renamed our youth program Strive, students taking responsibility in valuing each other. Isn't that beautiful? All focusing on self-esteem and empathy. As the years went by, we were constantly working to improve the effectiveness of our children, of the programs, the effectiveness of our programs. In 1984, we engaged the NCCJ board in a study of prejudice as a means to assess the strategies that we had been putting to use. A 15-member task force of the board read Golden Allport's 1954 book, The Nature of Prejudice, and participated in a series of animated discussions with a succession of experts about various aspects of prejudice. Here's some of what we found. Just one moment. We found prejudice is the result of a psychological filtering and screening process, which every person uses all the time. We each develop a convenient and effective system for simplifying and ordering the large amount of information and stimuli we receive daily. And we filter the people data according to perceptions and preferences and judgments. For example, listening to the tapes in our heads from what we have heard from our families. This is necessary in coping with the diversity and range of different people encountered, and risky because it's the same process that produces prejudice. Responding by habit, persons fall into socially dangerous stereotyping and labeling and the limiting of human potential on the basis of color, religion, sex, size, manner of speaking, and so on. Prejudicial attitudes lead to discriminatory actions. Our research, we learned that our identity, who we see ourselves as, is clearly influenced by what we are able to control as well as by how we are valued by others. The level of confidence we carry with us in our identity determines to a large degree our ability to control or accomplish, and clearly influences people's expectations of us as well as their reactions to us. The way and extent to which we are valued will directly impact our ability to control our environment and to accomplish anything. We discovered there was a success spiral as well as a reverse of failure spiral. Success breeds confidence and more success. Being valued by others will simply strengthen the person's own sense of value. It will also help the person less likely to distance him or herself when an injustice occurs. But the more comfortable and secure we feel within ourselves of our own value, the more resilient we are and the better able we are to accept others' differences. On the other hand, failure breeds failure, which breeds fear and more failure, and no sense of control over oneself or one's environment, and little to no resilience. How we value ourselves is impacted by feedback we receive from others, actually throughout our lives. The more comfortable we are with ourselves, the more apt we are to risk being accepted and open to others. If we view ourselves as inferior, we may degrade others as a protection against our own feared inferiority. Most important, we found that one of the keys to interrupting the cycle of prejudice is the ability of a person to develop a sense of affinity or empathetic understanding with the victim of prejudice and the discrimination. Just exactly what we were doing with children when we explored how they felt when they were included or excluded from a circle of caring. Further, the ability to develop such affinity and accept differences is directly related to our own feelings about ourselves and the key to disrupting the cycle of discrimination. And there was so much more. All of this study by my NCCJ committee resulted in my writing and publishing a document that we called A New Look at Prejudice, Program Implications for Educational Organizations. It was printed by NCCJ's national office and shared with all the other 75 regions. And as we reflected on our NCCJ programming, especially Green Circle, we felt really good about what we were doing, how effective and important the development of affinity or empathy was as we were interacting with children using our Green Circle model. More recent research has confirmed and built on these conclusions. As I kept Googling for more recent findings and preparing for this talk, I was again and again sent back to that early research we looked at, from Gordon Allport's definition to the later concepts of microaggressions to confirmation bias and then explicit and much later implicit bias. Some new terms, but building on the same basic concepts. So here were some lasting lessons for us. Cultivate a positive sense of self, especially for children. Promote the development of affinity, of empathetic connections with children and with adults. Help adults recognize the explicit bias that plays out with overt racism and racist comments, or overt sexism and sexist comments, or other isms. Help adults see how we are biased to confirming our existing beliefs. Help adults discover how our social behavior is largely influenced by unconscious associations and judgments, which is what is called implicit bias. So much to be aware of, and so much to do. Sadly, NCCJ and Green Circle are no longer around to help us with this work. All the more reason for communities like our UU congregations to work to understand it. Personal shout out here now to Kathy Stam, who once again joined me as I worked on this sermon to go back and revisit our Green Circle work and the lessons that can still help us today. And a shout out to all the other Green Circle volunteers who participated in this contribution to our community those decades ago now. In October 2017, very recently actually, gave a sermon at First Unitarian. Tom Andrews was then the president of the UUSC, and he spoke about the UUSC trip to Myanmar that year. He talked about the seriousness of the plight of the Rohingya people. And my husband and I had been to Myanmar 3 years earlier when there were just rumblings about some of the Buddhist monks' involvement in the attacks on the Rohingya Muslims. Coffee hour was crowded, and there was no chance to have a one-on-one chat with Andrews to compare experiences. But as we walked out our front doors, we found ourselves on the sidewalk together. I'll never forget his response to my further questions regarding the monks' involvement. He told me of their story, going back down to Yangon to leave the country, and their stop at a major monastery. He told of asking the head monk about the Buddhist philosophy of relating to others. Of course, the monk responded, loving kindness. But what about the way you deal with the Rohingya people, Andrews asked. And the monk responded, but they are the other. I stood there on the sidewalk, outside our beloved doors. My blood ran cold. The other. And from someone who really believes he lives and preaches loving kindness. In hindsight, part of me wants to flippantly say, well, there's no affinity there, but it is so discouraging to note where the loving kindness has its limits. But I am determined it can work. It is the golden rule, and looking back, that was the guiding light of my childhood. And it is so you besides. It's our very first principle, our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Isn't this what it's all about? Sometimes, as Rosemary Bray McNatt says, it is hard work. But Green Circle reminds us about the power of affinity, about putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. It is a vision of a world still out there. May it be so.